Dog marked down for posterity.
No.
Came to say goodbye to it, didn't he?
Okay.
Abraham and the Gods. It is difficult to think of the great patriarch Abraham, father of all the Jews and all the Arabs, as a young boy, but of course he was once. Even when he was quite young, Abraham believed in the one true God. He also believed he should honor and respect his father. However, this was not very easy, for Abraham's father was a maker of idols, and Abraham had to help him in the workshop. The idols that Abraham's father made were strange and various. Some were tiny, some were enormous. Some were carved from stone, some were covered with silver or gold, or actually made of gold and precious stones. Abraham's father was a very wealthy man. It was very easy to be a seller of idols. Nobody ever argued about the price, because they feared they might offend the gods. So he could charge as much as he liked. The name of Abraham's father was Terah, and it must be said that his idols were very good value for people who liked that sort of thing. Very wealthy people bought the ones of jewels and gold. Fairly wealthy people bought the ones covered in silver and gold. And ordinary people bought the ones carved in stone. Some poor people asked Terah to carve idols from wood, and these he could do quite cheaply. However, there were some people who were so poor they couldn't afford to buy an idol at all, and they would ask Terah if they could come into his workshop and worship the idols that were there. Now, one of these poor people who came to worship in the workshop was Mrs. Pompomovitz. She was very poor indeed, but very faithful, and every day she would come to the workshop to worship the great god Kutzkutz, although she had hardly enough food and clothes for herself and her family. She would bring offerings to Kutzkutz that she could really not afford at all, and it used to worry Abraham, who thought it would be a lot more sensible to give the food to her hungry children. The great god Kutzkutz was a dreadful sight. His legs were short and bowed, and he had an enormous stone belly that almost touched the ground. He had a very long nose and very long ears, and his eyes were made of emeralds and were very close together. Although he was carved from stone, he had a shawl round his shoulders, woven from pure cloth of gold. In one hand he held a mighty club, and in the other an axe, and the expression on his face was extremely disagreeable. On the shelf above Kutzkutz stood the idol of the great god Baal. He was very tiny and very beautiful. He was carved in the shape of a hunter, with a bow in his hand and a dog at his feet, and he had been fashioned from a solid lump of jade and was worth an enormous amount of money. One morning, Terah loaded up the wagon with a selection of idols, harnessed the oxen to the front, and set out for the nearby town of Haran. It was his intention to sell the idols in the marketplace. Terah was a bit preoccupied, wondering how much money he would make that morning. Just as the wagon was disappearing over the hill, his wife Rita came running out of the kitchen. "Oh dear," she called to Abraham, "has your father gone to Haran already? He's forgotten the shopping list, and we have very little food in the house." It was too late to try and catch Terah, so Rita went back into the kitchen, and Abraham set about sweeping and tidying up in the workshop. A few minutes later, Mrs. Pompomovitz knocked shyly at the door and peeped round the corner of the workshop. "I have come to say my prayers," she said, and bowed her head, and approached the great god Kutzkutz, holding out a bowl of beautiful fine white flour. "Oh, Mrs. Pompomovitz," said Abraham sadly, "why do you give awfully expensive gifts to that fat old idol? Look at its great stone belly. Even if it could eat flour, it doesn't look hungry. Why don't you take it home and make some bread for your children?" Mrs. Pompomovitz looked terrified. She stared round the room as though she expected to be struck by a thunderbolt, and then threw herself on her knees in front of the idol. "Don't listen to him, O great god Kutzkutz," she said. "He is only a young lad. Do not strike him down. Please accept this flour which your poor servant has brought you." Abraham sighed in despair and went on with his sweeping up. Later on in the day, Abraham's mother Rita came across to the workshop. "Oh dear," she said, "I thought your father would be back by now. I have nothing to cook for tea." "How about pancakes?" suggested Abraham slyly, looking at her out of the corner of his eye, and he pointed to the bowl of fine white flour which Kutzkutz had not touched. Rita looked rather worried. "Do you suppose we should?" she asked doubtfully. "You know that after the food has been offered to the gods, we're supposed to give it away to anyone who is hungry." "We are hungry," said Abraham, "and we shall be a jolly sight more hungry by the time father gets back." "Oh, all right," said Rita, and she tipped the bowl of flour into a large dish and went back into the kitchen to cook pancakes for tea. And then a dreadful thing happened. Abraham turned sharply and caught the beautiful jade figure of the god Baal with the end of his broomstick. It fell to the stone floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces. Before he had time to sweep up, the door opened and Terah came in. He looked round the workshop in horror and approached his son with an angry, frowning face. "What has been going on here?" he demanded. "What is happening?" Abraham thought quickly. "Well," he said, "it was like this, father. Mrs. Pompomovitz brought a large bowl of fine white flour for the god Kutzkutz. Look, you can see the bowl is still there. And the great god Baal shouted out, 'It's not fair. People keep bringing you presents, and I am much prettier than you, you pot-bellied old fool.' And Kutzkutz was so angry that he jumped off the shelf and hit Baal over the head with his axe and broke him into 1,000 pieces. And then he sat down and ate all his flour." Terah stared at his son with his mouth open. "What on earth are you talking about, you stupid boy?" he shouted in a rage. "How dare you tell me such a great taradiddle of lies and nonsense? You know as well as me the idols are only lumps of stone. They cannot speak or hear, let alone fight or eat flour." Then Terah stopped suddenly, realizing what he had said. He looked around at the idols as though he half expected they would rise up and strike him. "Oh, father, father," said Abraham sadly, "cannot your ears hear what your mouth is saying? Why are we wasting our lives like this among these useless lumps of wood and stone?" Shortly after this, the Lord spoke to Abraham and said to him, "Leave your country and your people and your father's household, and go to the promised land which I will show you. And I will make you the father of many great nations, and I will bless them." So Abraham sadly packed up his belongings and left his father's house and went forth to seek his fortune.